state as you and we attempt to raise awareness and understanding of the issues and challenges facing public education this election year. I think it's fair to say that no factor is more important to a community's economic prosperity and its social cohesiveness than public education. That's certainly how we view things at the Phil Harding Foundation. The public schools are at the heart of the community's efforts not only to give young people the education that they need to be successful in life, but to build a community's capacity to meet its economic and social challenges and to enjoy a high quality of life. Without good public schools, no community is going to reach its full potential. And without strong community support, no public school system will be what it needs to be. And of course, Meridian and Lauderdale County, the community of Meridian and Lauderdale County is no different. Public education must be the highest of community priorities if we want to get where we want to go. And we're fortunate this evening to have the opportunity for a conversation with our two superintendents. Caroline has already introduced Dr. Carter and Dr. Cain. And I think a distinction that Dr. Carter is the homegrown 20 plus years as a teacher, a classroom teacher, a principal, an assistant superintendent before becoming a superintendent. And Dr. Cain as the first appointed school superintendent in Lauderdale County after the law changed and that position became an appointed position, and deputy superintendent in Scott County, as well as many years as a teacher and principal in Kosciuszko. So, as Caroline mentioned, two differing and both very strong backgrounds in education. And let me say, I think that the very presence of these two leaders here this evening says a lot about who they are and how they lead. They're both highly visible leaders who are deeply engaged with the community. They're both open, accessible, and willing to share their thoughts and ideas. And very importantly, they're willing to work together for the benefit of all the children in our expansive community here. So thank you both for being here and for your willingness to enter into this conversation with each other. And later in our discussion, the audience will have the opportunity to ask these two leaders questions or make comments within reason, of course, in terms of time, but mainly to elicit information and to ask questions. And we'll get to that point in our discussion. You know, so often when we talk about education, we immediately focus on the problems that schools and educators face, and we'll certainly do our share of that this evening. But I thought it might be good for us to kick off this conversation on a little more positive note. So let's begin with this question for both of the superintendents. What are you proudest of that has happened in your district recently? Dr. Carter, you want to start with that?
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
It's not often that you give an educator a mic and ask us to brag, so I hope someone has the time clock going. I am most proud of the fact that Meridian Public School District has such a rich history of graduates. Each time I show up at a community event, I tend to ask, how many of you bleed blue? And typically, most people in the room raise their hand. So although it's not a recent accomplishment, it's one that we use to instill pride in the students that we serve. I'm also proud of the fact that when most school districts have reduced funding regarding the arts, Meridian Public School District has become nationally known for our partnerships with our community, with the arts, statewide, and with the Kennedy Center. So that's not a recent accomplishment, but it's part of our foundation and our backbone. really go down the list of brag points. Sometimes when you talk to school districts, you hear brag points about we're an A school or we're a B school, but I'm most excited about the fact that Meridian Public School District can proudly say we have no failing schools. And that has not been the case since 2015. So it's been pretty close to 5 or 6 years since we could brag about that point. And that is something that we're most proud of. 80% of our schools showed growth last year. We had 80% growth in reading proficiency and 90% growth in math proficiency. And when you look at the labels, you don't know the narrative or the story behind those labels. So it's critical that we share those and celebrate those accomplishments of our students and our teachers. We're also very proud of the fact that 13 of our schools, all of our schools, are known as statewide, nationally known, statewide known PBIS schools. And a lot of times people skate over that, but basically that means when you have children coming into the educational environment with diverse backgrounds, diverse issues, problems, our schools are known statewide for the work that we're doing in that particular area. We're really proud of Ross Collins. That is our hidden jewel, and most times people don't know the value of that jewel. But Ross Collins actually has 8 programs that are dually certified or enrolled in connection with Meridian Community College. We have a nationally certified program, which is our automotive program, and we had 128 students to graduate with college credit as a part of participating in Ross Collins. Lord, can I keep going, or have I exceeded my time? I mean, I can keep going. Ultimately, I think you can tell that I'm really proud of Meridian Public School District, and I'm really proud to be partnering with Lauderdale County Schools. And I'm looking forward to sharing more about the partnership that John-Marc and I have as we work to make sure Lauderdale County is nationally known, not just state known.
Good evening. Again, I'd like to just thank everyone for this opportunity, and the Phil Harden Foundation and the Max for hosting the Humanities Council as well, and this forum. It's very important. And as Dr. Carter mentioned, having the mic and getting to brag a little bit, we don't get to do that very often. She mentioned, do you bleed blue? It's a little tougher in Lauderdale County. I carry different colored shirts in my car. I've got a maroon shirt, a red shirt, a blue shirt, a white shirt, a black shirt. Because if you walk into the wrong building with the wrong color on, you get talked about a little bit. But that's what makes Lauderdale County unique and strong, is our communities and our schools. And we know what our schools mean to each community. And you know, we try to come together as a county, but we also know those unique differences mean a lot to those individual communities, and we pride ourselves in that. But we have 60, just to kind of give you some numbers here, we have 6,185 students in our school district. We currently have a graduation rate of over 86%. Our students gained over nearly about $5 million last year in scholarships alone. Our average ACT score is 18.9, which is a full point above the state average. And we've been blessed this past year to be recognized for some of our achievements. We've got some great people that work in our office, and they'll say I'm working hard, and they're telling you the truth. But for our efforts, we're recognized by the Mississippi Association of Partners in Education with the Governor's Award, with our partnership with the MCC. That was with our career grading program for ACT and WorkKeys. We were fortunate enough this past year to complete a strategic planning process. I recognize some faces in this room that were a part of that, and some financial support that was a part of that. Once again, we thank the Harden Foundation. Our school board recently committed to improving our facilities, and that was going to be a $10 million project over the next year. So most of our schools were constructed in the 60s. This is 2019. Most of ours were constructed in 1962. On some of our campuses, we still have students who are attending class that were constructed in 1936. So we realize that we have to make a commitment to our facilities and to our students to continue to provide them a safe and educational environment that they deserve. We've recently partnered with Barksdale Reading Institute. They're going to come in and partner with us with our grade 2 through 5 students and help us develop some intervention strategies. You've probably seen some of the Parent Academy commercials or campaigns on social media that are taking place for those students who are looking to enter grade school over the next few years. They're helping us educate parents on how to prepare their students for school. Just recently, over the last few days, we're excited to announce that we applied for and received a grant from the Hardin Foundation to update our technology in all of our high schools, all of our classrooms. And so that's going to be a tremendous benefit to the district. And we look forward to that and thank them again for that. One of the biggest differences, and probably the special points of Lauderdale County School District over the last year or so that you've probably witnessed is our addition of Ms. Andrea Williams as our PR person. If you follow us on social media, in the newspaper, on television, those media outlets will tell you that she's a critical part of that partnership and making sure that our story gets out. Because we believe that we have a lot of good to tell, and we understand that those good stories, not only are feel-good stories, but they're recruiting stories. They're recruiting stories for Meridian and Lauderdale County. Those individuals start looking at our area, they do a lot of research. And when they go and Google and they find and they see those success stories that are part of Meridian and Lauderdale County School District, it only helps our cause when we're trying to recruit those businesses and things for economic development. So we see that as a critical part of getting our story out and also helping the local community and the region abroad. So we're excited to be here, and I think we'll just turn it over to Mr. Rick.
All right, you've had your bragging time now, and now we're moving to the tougher part. I want y'all to talk about some of your toughest problems or obstacles that you face in trying to educate our community's children. What are the obstacles out there that are preventing you from doing the job that you need to do with it you're having to scale? You want to start with that, Dr. King?
Yeah, I'm going to try not to make this a pity party. I think we do a tremendous amount with what we have and the regulations and restrictions that we face. Let's talk about teacher shortage. I know we've heard that, you've seen it, you've heard it, the candidates speak about it in forums and things and debates. 10 years ago, we were graduating 7,000 education graduates across our universities. This past year, that number was below 700. So we went from 7,000 per year to less than 700 in 10 years. Now, out of that 700, we're all competing for those individuals. And not all of them go directly into the classroom. Many of them decide to return to school. Many of them may decide that they do not want to go into education at all. And so that number shrinks even further. And then the lure of out-of-state salaries that surpass our own attracts even more individuals. So that number shrinks and shrinks and shrinks. So one of the largest obstacles that we all face is finding those certified teachers to fill those roles, and then we all want the best. So as Dr. Carter and her team goes out for recruiting visits, and we do the same, we're all looking for the home run because we understand that the most impactful thing that we can do in education is put a great teacher in the classroom. And so we're all competing.
great job of elaborating on, I think, one of the greatest challenges that we all face as educators in the state. Meridian was recognized at a state level and a national level for our retention and recruitment practices. In partnership with Phil Harden, we came up with a campaign called Teach Meridian. And now the state has a campaign called Teach Mississippi, which mimics the program that we were able to develop. But even with those efforts, we find ourselves still struggling with putting the most qualified person in front of students. And I told my school board my first year that challenges are something that I see as opportunities. But the most difficult opportunity I faced as a superintendent my first year and these past couple of years has been filling our classrooms with passionate and qualified educators. So we spent a lot of time working towards growing our own. When I talk a lot about being committed to Meridian, it's critical that sometimes we find people that return back to our communities that would have graduated with a degree in biology or in accounting, and we find ourselves actually luring them to education and saying, come on, let us work with you so that you can become a part of what we're building. Another challenge beyond teacher recruitment and retention is the struggle that children in poverty bring to our classrooms and some of the trauma that they face. A lot of times, communities don't like to talk about the fact that families and children are facing mental health issues. And in our community, it's alive and well. And when you don't have the support and the resources that you once had at one point, you find yourself as an educational entity trying to provide children with support that your educators are not necessarily trying to provide them. So we've done a great job of putting behavior supports in place, behavior counselors, but it's disheartening sometimes when you walk into a classroom and you see a teacher struggling with a child that she passionately loves, but she does not have the resources or the skill set to provide that child what he or she needs because of the trauma they faced at home. And then last but not least, one of the challenges that we wrestle with as an urban, a city school district, is sometimes just the negative perception that people tend to have about our public schools. Matt does a great job. Matt Davis, wave your hand back there. Does a great job of telling a positive narrative for Meridian Public School District. But sometimes I find when I put a positive comment on social media, it may get 1 or 2 shares, 1 or 2 likes. But then when someone goes on and says something about being upset about the lunchroom food, it may get 25 shares. And I'm thinking, that's a perfect opportunity for us to work with problems and situations and work through those. So it's being able to get our community engaged and involved in the right conversations so that we can all be part of the solution and not part of the problem. So I went through my laundry list pretty quickly, Lloyd. Do you want me to keep going?
That's all right. We've got plenty of time to cover the challenges, and I want to come back to the first one that you both mentioned, the teacher shortage and the challenge of teacher recruitment and retention. 2 things come to mind that have been very much at the top of the people's awareness recently, and certainly in the public debate, and that is salaries for teachers, and also the intense focus and emphasis on testing, which if you look at the anecdotal evidence, is demoralizing a number of teachers and in some cases driving them out of the profession. Can you, the 2 of you, give us your perspective on those 2 things? How important is salary in recruiting and retaining teachers and getting teachers to even major in the field and go into it? And then this whole business of the pressurized testing environment as well.
I was having a conversation with a superintendent and a principal of one of our metro area schools this past week, and this very conversation came up about salaries, and we hear matching the southeastern average and things of that nature to keep our teachers here. But then we got to go back a little further and and it's not necessarily just recruiting them, but it is keeping them and retaining them. What we're seeing more and more of is those teachers who are eligible at 25 years or electing to retire or perhaps pursue private institutions after that, to, as we call it, the double dip, because of the pressures of the classroom. I don't think we will ever, at this day and age, I don't think we will ever match the salary to the stress level. And the stress level today is being induced by the testing environment. We have a very, very stringent accountability model. It is you almost have to be a statistician to be able to understand it completely. And our teachers just want to go in the classroom and teach. You know, they don't want to be bothered by that. They just want to go in, and that's why they went into the profession years ago, because they enjoyed teaching and seeing those light bulb moments happen and kids learn. But it has become so punitive in nature that Dr. Carter and I, I'm sure, we stay up and we worry about this from the time we get school to the end of the day. When the school's out, preparing all summer, you're continuously having to evaluate data. You're looking at all of these different benchmarks that you have to meet, and it is extremely taxing and stressful. And unfortunately, there's a market out there, and you know, there's people that are benefiting from that model. And as you said, the anecdotal data can be argued as to whether or not we as a nation have progressed under that model over the last 20 years. We obviously are producing better test takers. But I think the question can still be raised: are we producing more prepared people for the workforce of tomorrow, and not that of 30 and 40 years ago?
I think I can simply say ditto on that one. Educators make all other professions possible. So when you think about the fact that we pay an athlete millions of dollars to run up and down a court, no offense, athletes in the room. I mean, I was once one myself. But at this point, I look at the value of what a teacher brings to our community and to our nation, and to not recognize and celebrate that impact, whether it be through state funding or federal funding or what have you, is just ridiculous from my standpoint. So to be able to pay teachers what they're worth, I agree, I don't think we'll ever get to that point, but our politicians continue to talk about it, but yet we don't put our money where our mouth is. When I look at the fact that the majority of the educators in Meridian have less than 10 years experience, ideally when you look at trying to create an incentive ladder, why not consider paying educators who have 25 plus years more money to stay into the profession? So even if you can't pay everyone more, initially start with those educators with the most experience and work backwards. Because when I look at a 25-year educator and I say, can you give me one more year, can you give me one more year? And they smile and say, yes. And then I go back the next year and say, can you give me one more year, can you give me one more year? And they say, Dr. Carter, I'm at 40, and I actually have a few that are 30 plus years with me. And my fear is that I'll look around and all the educators in our district will be babies. So I'm saying that to say this is a critical concern for us, and testing does not make it any easier. Education is about working with the whole child. That's why I'm so excited about the arts and not losing those core things that will allow children to find their gift and find their voice in the world. Because when you think about it, testing creates such an anxiety and a stress level for many of our educators, for many of our children. It's oftentimes that whether it's a district test or a state level test, we find children that are stressed, and what little child should be stressed about learning? Education is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be an experience, a journey. And sometimes testing doesn't allow it to be so. The extra time that teachers spend preparing for a test, the amount of time that we spend, that we lose teaching, instruction, is scary sometimes. And I literally have to say, is there a way that we can take this off the table? And I have board members in the room that have been a part of that conversation at one point, where we realized how much instructional time we were losing compared to how much time we were teaching. And so just the overall perception of testing, of course, is how we pay the light bill. That's what I tell my educators. But the shift in our culture and in our district has to be about, and we preach this often, it has to be about focusing on the needs of the child, and testing will take care of itself.
A follow-up to the earlier point you made about children from poverty being particularly challenging to educate effectively, and really documented also, it's more expensive to educate a child from poverty. And yet at the same time you have, because teachers are more challenged and it's more stressful, and the performance, the correlation between poverty and test scores is almost exact in many cases. You have teachers who are stressed out in that regard, and who then find a place to go where there's not that challenge or less of a challenge. Is that something that you see in a high poverty district? Not, of course, that Lauderdale County does not have a level of poverty, but it is higher in the city district. Is that something that is a factor in your attracting and retaining teachers?
Definitely, Lloyd. We don't use it as an excuse, but it's a barrier. Quite often when I sit down with an educator for an exit interview when they're leaving our district, and I literally sit down face to face and I ask, tell me why you're leaving Meridian. We have bukus of professional development, we have professional learning communities, we try to attach our educators with churches in the community, with events in the community, and they will look at me and say, the work is so difficult here. I could go next door, no offense, my friend, to Lauderdale County or to Enterprise, and I don't have to work as hard. And then I ask for concrete examples, and they share examples with me, and then I go back to the team and I say, okay, do we need more counselors? Do we need more psychologists? What do we need? And sometimes it's just disheartening when you work so hard and you see a little bit of growth versus when you work with students who have two-parent homes or education is valued in those homes. And you can go to a neighboring district and see lots of growth. And so it's a real challenge for us. The other thing sometimes that we battle with when we look at children in poverty, we have a great Excel by 5 partnership with Lauderdale County. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But we still have a large percentage of children that don't receive any educational experiences prior to entering pre-K or kindergarten. And so it's scary when you look at the number of words that a child, or the language that a child lacks when they come into an educational environment, versus if they've been in a family setting where there are books available, where the parents believe in exposing them to travel, to educational experiences. So it poses a gap, but again, it's not an excuse. And I hope I'm communicating that clearly. We can't ever use it as an excuse, but we have to figure out how to overcome the barriers and the challenges that our children bring.
Dr. Cain, any observations you have about this whole issue of students from poverty and how we can serve them better and also make teachers more effectively prepared to teach those kids?
Yeah, as we mentioned, we have 4 separate communities, 4 separate school zones in the Lauderdale County School District, and 2 of our school districts, or two of those zones are high poverty areas with ranging from 73%, 72% respectively, free or reduced lunch. And those areas are more difficult to, you find that the needs are higher, the social emotional needs are higher. And then you get into, trying to provide equitable needs throughout those 4 communities. On the surface, it can oftentimes lead to frustration or questions about why are we doing this here but not here. And that's the challenge that we face as a school district each year when we're preparing the budgets and we're discussing those issues with our board. The needs in one area may not be the same needs in another area. And so we have to evaluate that because we know, as you mentioned, looking at the data, those students who come from high poverty areas, even if you look at nationally norm tests such as ACT, you typically see a 3-point differential between students of poverty and those that are not. So we have to address that each and every year. It's not going away, as Dr. Carter mentioned, but we try to be equitable and distribute our resources to have the largest impact on those groups.
There is an issue that's a perpetual source of debate and discussion about the impact, and that of course is funding at the state level. And under the current Mississippi Adequate Education Program, I think I'll cite Becky for this, and Parents for Public Schools. 36.8 million underfunded according to the formula in MAP in the Lauderdale County District over the last 10 years. 28.6 million underfunded for the Meridian District. What sort of impact does that have on your ability to do what you need to do and to teach children from poverty, as well as a lot of other things? And I assume one impact is that Lauderdale County District recently raised millage. You have a tax increase. Tell us about your perspective on the funding issue and what you could be doing with the money that by law you're supposed to get.
Well, I was looking for John-Marc to tell us about that tax increase so that I could take some notes. We talked a lot about the impact on teacher pay, so that's definitely where we could, I believe, retain more educators in our state. But for us, it would be quality pre-K. And Lord, I hope I can jump in that, Wayne, before you get there. We currently spend about $1 million in our pre-K program, where we have 11 classrooms. But there's still over 50%, I believe, from one of our Excel by 5 meetings, Cheryl, where we have about 50% of Lauderdale County's children that could be in an early childhood program that aren't. And so to be able to take that $28 million and really put it into early childhood efforts, I think would level the playing field for children in poverty. It will be such a huge opportunity for us. Of course, resources, books, but I go back to the most important value in the classroom is the educator. So ultimately for us, it would be to put more dollars towards the educators who commit to providing our children with quality learning experiences.
I do want to follow up with the pre-K. Governor Bryant did some research recently with a world-known economist. He said the return on investment for early education and pre-K was 13.8%. Just to kind of let you know, we spend about $30,000 on each person that we incarcerate, and we spend about $9,000 annually on each student. A student that has entered school unprepared and 60% less likely to enroll in college. So when we talk about funding issues, echo Dr. Carter said, that's huge. If we had those resources to do what we know we should do, I always say, I see a lot of school districts and you know, they're celebrating, and they should. You know, their A status and this. But the difference is resources. They think it, and they make it happen. They say, that's a good idea. And next thing you know, it's implemented. But when you're dealing with areas where student population or student numbers may be decreasing, that directly affects your budget, and you can't just think it and make it happen. But I do want to address the tax increase. This year from Jackson, the PERS contribution amount for state employees went from I think 15.7 to 17.2%. That cost is given right to us, directly to your school district. That was an increase of $545,000 directly to the school district. Insurance premiums for all employees went up another $105,000. And then step increases for the annual teacher raises was another $368,000 that districts had to incur. So that's $1 million in additional expenses that was passed to the local level from the state legislature. So, in my opinion, what you are seeing is this shift of responsibility over the last few years from the state level to the local level, and there's only one way that we can handle that. Now we had a strenuous budget process, and we went through and made as many cuts as we could that we felt like would not be a detriment to the education environment and to the classroom, because all of you people still expect great schools. We expect great schools. And if we start cutting people that will affect that, then all of a sudden we're like, what's happening? What's going on? But again, $1 billion in new expenses. We had to ask the people of Lauderdale County to help us out with that. So that's where that came from. And I think our increase was 1.19, I believe, that our supervisors willingly, graciously agreed to. And that helped us generate about another $700,000 in revenue. And I think that probably is $400,000 more than the assessed value increases. So we would have had some there anyway. But again, these are expenses that were passed from the state level to the local level, and if we expect to continue to have good schools, then we'll have to look at all options on the table.
Amen over here.
Yes, John-Marc, thank you for that explanation, and I asked you to speak directly to it because sometimes when school districts and cities have to ask for a tax increase, the community tends not to understand. Meridian, and I have one of my councilmen here, when you look at millage, we're maxed out. So it shows you it costs a lot more to educate, again, children in poverty. But I appreciate the fact that you discussed not considering cutting resources and personnel. And a lot of times when we have to look at making cuts, that's the first place we have to go. But when you look at the challenges and the barriers, that's the last place we need to consider. Cutting resources and cutting personnel from students. So I commend you and I commend your board for taking that brave step in that particular area.
Well, you know, nothing can be any tougher after that to talk about. So I'm going to pause here for a minute and see if there are any thoughts that have been evoked in the audience, and if there are any questions you either have developed as you've listened in your mind, or that that you came here hoping to ask. And now's your opportunity to ask either or both of these superintendents, and we're going to get back to discussing some other issues in a bit, but thought we, rather than waiting until the end, we'd sort of pause here in the middle and ask for questions. Caroline, do you want to take a mic around? Yes, sir. We appreciate our elected officials being here tonight, by the way.
Dr. Cain, per a conversation you and I had a few weeks ago, would you touch on the school attendance and head count and how vital that is?
This is going to blow your mind, okay? We receive funding based on the number of students that we have. As we mentioned, we have 6,185 students in our school district. The months of October and November are critical in the formula that Mr. Gray mentioned, the MAEP. We have a funding mechanism in there called average daily attendance. Now, the average daily attendance looks at the number of students that actually attend out of that 6,185 in October and November. So if we have 6,185 students enrolled, we as a school district, we have to prepare to educate 6,185 students. What the state does is they look at that snapshot of October and November, and they dictate the per pupil funding that they're going to give us. So in those 2 months, if we only have 95% of our students in attendance, that's what they're going to fund us at. So we're not being funded for the number of students that we actually have. We're actually being funded for the number of students who are actually present in the months of October and November. So let me take it a step further. What does present mean? Present means being in school 63% of the school day. All right? 63% of the school day. So we have over 100 school buses that we operate. Those school buses go out every morning and they pick up those students. They bring them to school. We prepare breakfasts for those students. We feed them breakfast. We educate them. We have snack time, whatever the case may be. Then we prepare lunches for those students, and then we provide them a lunch. But let's say that Johnny has a doctor's appointment in Jackson, and his father has to come get him early and take him to that doctor's appointment. Well, guess what? If Johnny checks out before 63% of the official school day, Johnny is absent. Which means that your local school will not receive funding for that student that day as it's calculated the following school year. I don't see how anybody can think that's right or fair, but that's why you see that underfunding that we talked about and Ms. Glover's talking about, and she's ready over there. It has a tremendous impact, a cumulative impact, year after year after year, and it's definitely the reason the shortfall is so painful year after year after year.
Dr. Cain, before Ms. Glover speaks, I just think it's important that we need to educate people that process and how that's counted, so the public understands. And then you just explained it well, but I think we need to do a better job of delivering that message to the public, to parents.
And I think we take that a step further, because sometimes when a parent shows up and they want to check a child out for a doctor's appointment, they get upset when you say, could you give us a few more minutes, because we're trying to get credit for that child for that full day. Another component of this attendance discussion is September was Attendance Awareness Month. And we were trying to get our families to see the value of just ensuring that a child is at school every day, because if they're not there, they can't learn. So an example of this that we share with our administrators, you take a child from kindergarten to 5th grade, and that child misses 10 days each year, that child has missed 60 days, which equates to 2 full months of their educational career. So a day here, a day there, a day here, a day there, it adds up. And you think about an educator who is working diligently to ensure that that child shows a year of growth, it's just disheartening. So not only are you working against an unfair funding formula for attendance, you're also battling just trying to get families to see sometimes the value and the importance of children being there every day and not missing a day unless they just have to.
And both of your districts are also competing against the actual decline in enrollment for your funding, right? Because both districts have lost a number of students in recent years.
In the work that I'm doing in 10 different counties to try to get voters educated about public schools and the underfunding and what privatization is and how it's not about improving traditional public schools, I'm encountering educators and administrators who are seriously intimidated to sit down and talk with legislators, even candidates, vying for their vote. And I would just like to know, have y'all ever been intimidated by legislators or by top elected leaders in our state?
A few years ago, there was some legislation that was proposed, known as Initiative 42. That initiative brought out a lot of passion, a lot of emotions, and I think probably some misinformation as well. And there was a very strategic and successful campaign to see that initiative was not passed by the people. What came out of that was superintendents felt it after that. At the time, I was not a superintendent, but I was an administrator. And what we saw was funding was cut for particular professional developments. There was a lot of animosity between the legislatures and school districts and school superintendents. That has not been forgotten. The ghost of 42 still is present, as they say. There is some apprehension of publicly speaking out on certain things and certain views. But at the end of the day, no matter which officials become our next officials in the next election, yes, thank you. In the next election, we'll have to work with either side. So there is some reservation, I think, sometimes to maybe passively jump in and maybe, as I say, pound the table because of the prior experiences that school districts had to endure.
Dr. Cain, you did a great job of explaining the ghost of the past. Although it is part of our past, it still looms. And so you find yourself as an educator tiptoeing to private meetings, sometimes with politicians, to share your position on particular issues. And I've seen cases where groups of superintendents have had to meet after hours to have discussions about our position on certain issues. And it does pose a barrier for us. So there is still a level of fear that rests among educators when we begin to share our positions simply because of the fact that funding was cut at one point because educators banded together and spoke out. And so you find yourself secretly inviting Becky Glover to an administrator meeting and talking about the issues that affect public education. And you're strategic about not endorsing certain candidates, but again, you find ways to educate the educators around you so that they can make informed decisions. Because a lot of times what happens, educators are so busy preparing lessons that we don't necessarily follow politics, and we miss out on some of the critical issues that can impact our state. So it's a ghost of the past, but it's still alive and well.
Any other questions, Rebecca?
Yeah. But also, the teachers, as we all know, have a teachers union which can serve as a voice to elected officials and the school boards association. So hopefully, through their various associations, they can discuss the problems that are particularly of particular interest. So hopefully, that the associations are responsive to the school boards and to the educators and administrators of the various districts. But with respect to the absenteeism, it just seems to me that there's a particularly kind of exciting possibility that an entrepreneurial physician, family physician, and an entrepreneurial child dentist could open up clinics. The hospitals are opening up clinics everywhere in this county. And it would seem to me, and I do believe that Meridian Public School District has its toe in the water with a nurse practitioner, if I'm not mistaken, coming into the school to help with treatment, diagnosis and treatment of teachers who may come to school not feeling quite up to snuff, and students. I think that that's an area that definitely needs to be pursued, with working with the hospitals and working with young dentists who want to start a practice. You know, I mean, we used to have that. Sometimes what's old needs to come around again, maybe in a different iteration, but you can have a clinic in a school, a dental clinic and a physician's clinic. I think those are things that could be explored that would help mediate some of these issues. Dr. Carter, I wanted to ask you, you said that well, and maybe Dr. Cain did, there's 50% of our children who are not experiencing pre-K experience. And as you know, day one that I set foot in this state, my goal was to establish pre-K, and we did to a certain degree. It's still not funded enough, obviously. I do understand that the feds are now coming in to fund pre-K at a little higher level, but we're still obviously missing a major segment of our population. How many kids exactly does that 50% entail of children who are not receiving a pre-K experience?
I'm not sure about the actual number itself, but we currently educate 210 students. So on average, Meridian will have anywhere from 210 to 240 students in our pre-K programs. We've tracked the data for those particular students. Their attendance is better, graduation rate, grades. When we looked last year at our kindergarten assessment, students who were in our pre-K compared to students who were not actually scored, I don't like to throw out numbers unless I have them in front of me, but we had 207 points growth last year as a district, and that was on the backs of those students who were exposed to pre-K prior to. You mentioned school-based clinics earlier. We are excited about a partnership with Greater Meridian where we are opening school-based clinics throughout Meridian Public School District, and it's basically an opportunity for our students, our teachers, to receive medical and dental services, but their families can also have access to those services as well. So it's a matter of our first clinic opened in the West End, Harris area, Harris Upper, Harris Lower, and so a family that lives in Frontberry could just walk out of their apartment and walk right to the clinic where there is a nurse practitioner. Believe it or not, I have staff members who, instead of taking the day off, will actually say, I'm not feeling well, may I go? And the principals work with them, and they immediately get services, and they're back in the classroom with students. So just shows you the benefit and the impact that our community partnerships in the medical field have on outcomes in our district and in our city.
Great.
Ms. Gray?
Would you let me answer the question? It ties into to the previous discussion. I understand about educators being intimidated, but we all have voices, we all have phones, most of us have email, and I hope we all vote, and we're obviously interested in education or we wouldn't be here. My question would be, what one or two things, concerns or messages, would you ask private citizens to take to our legislature?
I think one way that we could, even going back to what Coach brought up about the ADA and the formula, there's been proposals about moving to an average daily membership, ADM, which would basically take a snapshot in the fall with your number of students in count, also take a second snapshot in the spring, to give you an accurate number of the number of students that you actually have to prepare for and purchase. Have teachers prepare with desks, books, and things of that nature. I think that would be a more fair assessment of what funding should look like. But the second thing I would ask is, what do they feel about just these issues that we've mentioned, pre-K? Where do you stand on that? Where do you stand on testing? Do you see it as the end all? Some people have this misconception that if we don't test it, we don't teach it. And I'm not sure where that came in, because growing up, I took one test to get out of high school. And then we have private schools that did one test as well, but those students, they come out just fine. So I don't understand where the sentiment that if we don't test it, we must not be teaching really comes from. I know it may sound oftentimes that we're afraid of accountability, but we're not. We support accountability. We just feel like it's excessive and it's punitive. And we will hold our people to the fire because we want, as Dr. Carter says, we want that child to have the whole child experience. And I know I rambled a little bit, Ms. Gray, but I think just to recap some of these things that we've mentioned, I would get their position on it. And I would get their position perhaps 4 years ago, 8 years ago, and not just 8 weeks ago.
Well, we may have some new faces come November, so.
I agree. It's critical that you know their position on public education. Does the candidate endorse charter schools? Do they endorse vouchers for special education and other areas of such? Pre-K is critical, and I appreciate Ms. Delaney's passion. She's been passionate about it since she arrived, and she's still passionate about it. So for us, it would be quality pre-K opportunities, and of course, teacher pay. That is critical, because as a state, I think we will continue to struggle with recruiting and retaining educators if we don't value and place our value in paying our teachers.
Time for one or two more questions before we head back to our discussion.
I just have a comment. First of all, I'm new to Meridian, so I came to kind of get the lay of the land. But at my daughter's school in Florida, I was a parent proctor for state testing, and I did the younger ages. And nothing breaks your heart more than to see a third grader burst into tears in the middle of these tests. Because in Florida, if you don't pass that test, you don't go on to 4th grade. So, and you're not supposed to touch them, but I was like, I'm sorry, I didn't know. I gave her a hug. It's okay, honey. I calmed her down. Girl, why not just keep going? And I don't know how you guys do it here, but they have computer-based testing, and when you spend half your time rebooting the computers because they crash, that's not taking a test. The kid has to try to remember where they were, get themselves back together. I think if some of these people on high had to do what we're forcing these kids to do, they might rethink how we do this. And I've been a vocal anti-tester for a long time, because I mean, testing kindergartners, who thought that was a good idea? Come on. We wonder why so many of our teenagers are depressed and on medication and all this other stuff. It's cumulative all the way through. And they don't want to do anything because they're burnt out. We're killing our kids. So anyway, that's my frontline observation on testing.
Thank you. Yes, welcome to Meridian. In Mississippi, third graders must also pass the test to move forward. Anyone else have a question?
I don't understand why you're intimidated. I don't understand that. You're the professionals. You know what you do. You elect these people. I'm always amazed how many teachers don't even vote. How many teachers aren't even registered to vote. I don't understand your fear or intimidation or whatever it is. If you're not willing to speak up for the children, superintendents and teachers, who do you expect to speak up for them? You're the people. You got a superintendent of education in the state, didn't even know how many teachers we had. So, as far as accountability, if she's the boss, doesn't even know how many teachers there are. Her idea of accountability, she makes 3 times as much as the governor. Speak up. Y'all are the people.
But the legislature has chosen that profession to put punitive measures on more than any other profession in this state.
Well, how are you going to stop it if you don't speak up?
Dr. Carter has an idea.
Well, what we do is we have organizations like the Mississippi Association of School Superintendents that when they were spanked on the wrist and funding was cut and we couldn't use our funds to lobby together, they were strategic in coming together and saying, let's get 3 major areas in education and let's speak to those. So gradually, since the funding, Initiative 42 failed issue, you have organizations that are coming together and they're being more strategic about it. And you're exactly right about educators not voting. And I'm appalled every time I hear about the fact that we don't take advantage of this opportunity. I probably shouldn't say this in this room, but we ran 3 voter registration drives for our high school students simultaneously. And just today I got a call about, can you use school buses to take them to vote? I said, well, I could count that as a culminating field trip to go along with the voter registration drives, as long as I can tie it to education and we don't endorse any candidate, maybe I could do that. So it goes back to what you're saying. We have to be strategic and smart about doing it, but there is a way to do it, because bottom line, if we don't speak up for our children, I don't know who will.
Right.
Tiffany.
I also think you said a little bit earlier, very, very brief about valuing education, the families valuing education. And I'm curious if you could share a bit about the parent university that's been rescheduled for November and what that might do for parent value of education.
We're finding that sometimes families or parents are intimidated by coming into the school environment for whatever reason. So our educators have come together and decided that it's not a bad idea to host a parent university or parent event where parents gather in various locations throughout the city. And they learn about resources that our community offers, whether that be medical resources, educational resources, faith-based resources. More importantly, we get a chance to showcase the talent of our children, as well as teach our parents about some of the educational resources available in their schools. So it just gives us a chance to celebrate while sneaking in a little education to our parents while they're there. So we'll be hosting one November the 19th at Bonita Lakes Mall from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. And that is the first of many that we'll host.
Sorry, is that someplace where you could also educate parents on advocating for?
Yes, definitely. We haven't dabbled much in getting our parents involved in the voting process as much as we've tried to educate our students on their right to vote. But I think as a community, we have such a golden opportunity there. So that's just not an educational responsibility. We all have a responsibility in that area.
We promised everyone that we would get you out by 7 o'clock, so we have just a few minutes left, and I thought we would go back to a discussion up here, but just a couple of things that we wanted to touch on before we adjourned. And as I mentioned earlier, I don't know, I think folks, if they don't understand, should understand the significance of these two folks being up here together. Now, you know, the C word has long ago become politically untouchable, and I don't think we're going to have consolidation anytime in our lifetimes in the community like Meridian, Lauderdale County. But there are ways that our schools can work together, share resources, cooperate in ways that benefit the students in both districts. And I'd like for you all to take a minute or two to kind of tell us your thoughts along those lines, what you are doing together and what you'd like to do together. Dr. King, you want to?
One of the greatest resources we share is our Career Technical Center, Ross Collins. We currently educate about 360 students there. About 200 plus of those students are Meridian students and 100 plus are Lauderdale County students. So we're excited about the fact that that's just not a Meridian initiative, that is a Lauderdale County initiative, and it's a hidden jewel that is grand across our state, and it represents, I think, a true collaboration and partnership. I think something else I'm most proud of, this past year, all of our administrators participated in collaborative meetings. So I had administrators from Lauderdale County walking through my schools, looking to see, checking on education, instruction, interactions, and to have colleagues in Lauderdale look and say, Meridian, you're doing some great things. Just keep at it, keep at it. You'll see the benefit. Then our leaders were able to go to schools in Lauderdale County. So our school leaders collaborated. And then I think I'm most proud of our Excel by 5 initiative, where both school districts are working together to figure out ways that we can expand pre-K opportunities and work closely with our Head Start centers to have more quality experiences for students. Want me to keep going, or you got a few over there?
I think Dr. Carter and I, as she mentioned, Ross Collins is a huge asset to both of us. And logistically, it's tough sometimes for Lauderdale County students. But we try to encourage them, and as we see more career technical fields open up and careers, long ago, VOTEC was the route for people who couldn't do, they wanted to, and that was a stigma. But it's not anymore. We know that we've got 40,000 jobs in the state of Mississippi that we can't fill. Governor Brown's mentioned about that multiple times. And we've got more and more economic development looking for CTE certification in students. And so we're going to expand that, where we've got to do a better job of eliminating the stigma associated with career technical education as it becomes more and more part of our growing economy. And I know it's important to this region and this area as we look to gain a business footprint here from outside industry and investment to benefit Meridian and Lauderdale County. We have 2 additional jewels that we both are lucky to have, and that's our partnership with MCC and MSU Meridian. Dr. Huebner and Dr. Cruz, they work hand in hand with us mainly during the weather. When we have inclement weather coming in, we're on high alert. We know we're going to make 50% of the people happy, and the other 50 will say we're not so smart. But we coordinate that all hours of the night with LEMA officials 12,000 students and multiple families that you know that you're going to affect. Those are big decisions, and we collaborate, I think, well on those.
You also have some formal arrangements on teacher recruitment and retention and other things with Mississippi State and MCC. And I think that's another point worth underscoring here, that in addition to these two working together, I think we've got a higher degree of cooperation among the leaders of our four major educational institutions or systems in MSU, Meridian, MCC, and the two school districts here. All four of you leaders seem to work very well together, and I think that's something that the community needs to continue to encourage. Dr. Cain, your district recently completed a strategic plan, and I know that you were talking about community and technical or career technical education, and that was a big part of it. In fact, it's the number one thing that's listed in the goals, and that came from a lot of community involvement and input that was solicited by the district. And that gets to a question that I think each of us here is interested in knowing your take on, both of your takes on, and that is, what do you need from the community? What do you need from us? We talk about engagement in voting and talking with legislators and policymakers, but just tell us what we can do to help make your job of educating children easier, and to help this community and these school systems flourish.
We need you to continue to be active participants in educating our children. The fact that you're here tonight, many of you don't have children in the educational system, but you realize that we are educating tomorrow's leaders, the next city council president that will be a part of Meridian, and you haven't turned your back on our public schools. So we need you to stay actively involved, actively engaged. We need you to help us spread the message of the value of an education. And it doesn't necessarily mean a child has to graduate and go to college. They can explore trades, careers, and help us get that message out that every child doesn't follow the same pathway to excellence. That pathway looks different sometimes. We also need business owners and business leaders to stay involved and continue to be role models. Recently, all of our schools hosted career fairs, and at one point we just did career fairs at the high school. Now we do them at the elementary schools, because I call them our little people, our little jewels have to see model examples of professionals in our community. So whether you're coming in and you're being a guest reader in our classrooms, whether you're being a tutor, whether your church wants to come together and tutor children, we need you involved, we need you engaged, and it's not always about financial resources. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that we don't need that, but I am saying your presence, your investment, the time that you put into our schools, that is truly what we need. And just continue to share the positive, and even when you hear negative, ask the right questions about root causes and how we can work together to be part of the solution. Okay, keep going.
I think Dr. Carter hit it on the head. Continue to be active, continue to be a voice, and continue to take interest and not turn your back and support us moving forward. Lauderdale County, we've lost 5,000 people, according to the last census in the county. And we know that the future is bright. We know that. And we know that having that capable and able workforce is what's going to spawn our improvement and our growth. 90% of students in Mississippi attend public schools. Secretary Husband's research when he went out and talked to businesses and industries looking to move into an area. The number one criteria, it said, was a capable and educated workforce. It wasn't tax incentives. It wasn't a lot of things that you hear over and over that will lure people here or drive them out. It's a capable and able, educated workforce. So as we continue to reach out to these people, these organizations, these entities, and those that are looking to invest in our community, they have to know that our community, our leaders support the public schools, and they will continue to do that and invest in our future. So we just need your voice to help us continue to do that.
Thank you both for this evening and your honest and candid assessment of your joys and your tribulations and your challenges and your achievements. And thanks to all of you for being here tonight and by your presence demonstrating your interest in and support for the educational efforts in our community. And I would also again thank the Mississippi Humanities Council for putting on these forums. Caroline, there you are over there. Congratulations, it is almost done. 12th of 12. So most of all, thanks to all of you. And is there still any food over there? A little food left if you want to get some on your way out. And yes, there's some beverages over there as well. So thank you, and let's give these two a